Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Sunday School Review. This week's Sunday School lesson is entitled Ezekiel's Vision. We are still continuing in the book of Ezekiel. And as we said last week and the week before, Ezekiel was a priest and a prophet. He was taken captive as an exile into Babylon early in the invasion, I believe during the first invasion by the Chaldeans or Babylonians. And he was taken down into Babylon. And he was called to prophesy or called as a prophet when he was in Babylon. And he spent the rest of his life in Babylon. And our lesson is taken from the 47th chapter of Ezekiel, verses 1 through 9 and verse 12. And there are three outlines in our lesson today. The first outline is Ezekiel 47, 1 and 2, and is guiding. And the second outline is waiting. That is Ezekiel 47, verses 3 through 5. And the third outline is learning, and that's the 47th chapter, verses 6 through 9 and verse 12. Okay, let us begin with our first outline, that is guiding. Now, in our lesson, the first outline starts at chapter 47, verses 1 and 2. Now, in actuality, this is, as the subject indicates, Ezekiel's vision. Now, the vision that Ezekiel is shown, and he's in the beginning, he's being taken on a guided tour. Now, this again is a vision. This is a vision that Ezekiel is given. Now, the vision actually starts at chapter 40 of Ezekiel. And if chapter 40, verses 1 through 4, I'm not going to read all of those verses there, but it says, verse 1, in the 5 and 20 year of our captivity, in 25 years after the Babylonian captivity. And this is the time frame that he's shown this vision. And it's a vision of a river flowing from the temple. This is the vision that Ezekiel is given. And if we look, as I said, it starts at 40, chapter 40. Okay, and if we look into chapter 42 of Ezekiel, he's taken into this temple. Again, this is a vision. In the vision, he's taken into the temple, and we go on down to our where our scripture starts in verse 1 of the 47th chapter, and it's basically, as I said, it's a guided tour. It said, afterwards he brought me again into the house, unto the door of the house. Now, the house that he's referring to here is the temple. The temple. Okay, so he brought me again unto the door of the temple, and behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house or the temple. Okay, and they were flowing eastwards, for the foremost of the house stood toward the east, and the waters came down from the right side of the house at the south side of the altar. And let's go ahead and read the second verse. It said, then brought me out the other way of the gate northward, and led me about the way without the other gate unto the other gate, and the way looketh eastward, and behold, there ran out water uh, on the right side. Now, what he saw, okay, again, as I said, the temple or the house is this house refers to God's dwelling. That is the temple. That's what the temple represented, God's dwelling. Okay, now the water in this verse here, the water represents God's presence. Okay, so in essence, this river was flowing from the temple, flowing from the temple, from God. Okay, and that's the first outline. So this river, I mean, it's not a river yet. Okay, let's don't get ahead of it. Okay, this water at this point is a trickle. It's just a small stream of water at this point, but it represents life from God. Now, if we think about this, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more, this is so the water issued out from under the threshold, and the water came down. So the water is flowing. There's at this point it's a trickle, but it's not stagnant. It's flowing, and it's flowing from God. Okay, it's flowing from the temple. It's not stagnant, but it's trickling, it's flowing. Okay, and that river, the water represents the presence of God. It's life from God. Now we know about water. Water is essential, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that again. But this water represents life given forth, the power of restoration, the power to give life. Okay, so this is life given power from God. That's what this water represents. This water represents life giving power from God, the ability to restore, to revive. Okay, so that's what that means. That's what that represents. And it's flowing. It's not still, it's not stagnant, but it's flowing. And it represents the presence of God, and it represents the power to restore, the power to give life. Okay, so let's go to the second outline, and the second outline is wading. Okay, initially we see in verse 1 and 2, we just see a trickle of water. That is a life-giving power from God. Okay, now the second outline is let's look at is wading. Let's look at verse 3. Okay, the first 1,000 cubits. Okay, let's first 1,000 cubits. And when the man that had the lines in his hand went forth eastward, he measured 1,000 cubits. So basically, first there was someone measuring the first 1,000 cubits. Okay, he brought me through the waters, and the waters were in the ankle. So we're going to see how the water is rising here, and what this really means to us. Okay, so basically, oh yeah, okay, we got the water. What does this mean? What this river, a rising river, symbolizes? Okay, so at first we see the trickle, and then 1,000 cubits they measured, and the water were to the ankle. Okay, that's the first. That's verse 3. So the first measurement After 1,000 cubits, the water came to the ankle. Now, again, we talked about the water. The water represents life-giving power from God. So first, and it comes from God. We already said that it was coming from the temple, God's dwelling. So it was from God. Okay, let's go to verse 4. Okay, and again he measured 1,000. So he went out another 1,000 and brought me through the water. Now, Ezekiel is in this water. Now, this is his experience, okay? Again, this is his vision. So, at first measurements, first he just saw the water trickling down. Once he got in it, the first measurement came up to his ankle, okay? The second measurement in verse 4, and again he measured 1,000 and brought me through the water, brought me through the water. He's in, like I said, he's in the water. Through the water were to the knee. Now, as we know, basically, what are you saying? The water is increasingly rising from the ankle now to the knee, okay? So that now the water is up to the knees, from a trickle now to the knee, okay? And we're going to read all of these and then come back and discuss them, okay? So the second measurement is the water is up around his knees, so higher, okay? Let's go to the verse, part B of verse 4. And again he measured 1,000, and he brought me through the waters where to the loins or the waist. That's the waist, okay? So the water went from the ankle to the knee, which is higher than the ankle, obviously. Now to the loins or the waist. Clearly the waist is higher than the knee, okay? Now the water is to his waist, okay? That's verse 4b. Let's go to verse 5, okay? Afterwards he measured again. He measured another 1,000, and the water was a river. Okay, so what do we find? What do we see? From a trickle to a river. Okay, now, and it was a river, and I could not pass, for the waters were written waters to swim in, a river that could not be passed over. So basically, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a spiritual growth journey. We're talking about that. We're talking about, the scripture says, to you have to have faith. He that comes to God must first believe. You got to have faith. You got to have some faith. But now you're not going to grow. It's just like a child, okay? A baby doesn't be a baby today and tomorrow they a teenager. No, it's a process. You know, they're a baby, they're a toddler, 2-year-old, or, and they grow. So your spiritual journey, your spiritual growth is a journey. And this is what this represents, your spiritual growth or faith. You can use faith. The same concept would apply if you're using faith. You start out small and you build on that faith. You start your spiritual journey out small and you grow. Okay, so this is showing spiritual growth as a journey, and as you, for example, let's look at 4. As you get more involved, like when you get saved, you probably just ankle deep. You don't know much. I mean, you probably think you know a lot, but you spiritually you obeyed. I mean, it would be senseless to throw you out in the river and expect you to survive. You're not going to survive. You got to grow. You start at ankle. You start with faith and you build on that to the point once you get to the knee, you have more spiritual maturity. You have more knowledge and understanding. And then you move from there to waist or loins. You become more spiritually, you have more spiritual growth. So this, as I said, represents your spiritual journey or your faith. How God is ever increasing blessings. Okay. So this is the thing. And okay, let's look at 5. Afterwards he measured 1,000, and at some point you're gonna get to the point where, I mean, the waters is going to be more than you can really negotiate. You have to rely on God. And God is constantly restoring you, because the waters, if you look at it from a trickle and to ankle deep to knee deep to waist high, that means the water is moving. It's not stagnant. Okay. So God is not, he's increasing your blessings. He's increasing your faith as time go on. Okay. And it's not a limited, well, I'm giving you all the uh, uh, all I'm giving you everything right now. This is it. You grow. You grow. It's a gradual process. And generally speaking, they call it a flash flood, I think it is, where the waters rise really quickly and people get swept away in a flash flood, because the water go from a trickle to a river in a matter of minutes or hours. Okay. And people die, drown when there's flash flooding. But if it's a gradual build up, people have enough reason to move out. Well, the water is ankle high and it's rising. Now it's knee high. Well, I better get out of here. But a flash flood, I mean, I never been in a flash flood. I never I never really saw on TV, but I think it does. The water rise very rapidly. I think I'm correct on that. When it's a flash flood, hence the name flash flood. I mean, it's in a minute, in a little while, the water is maybe ankle deep, and all of a sudden, this water is over your head. Like in verse 5, it says it was a river, from a trickle to a river. But this was a gradual process. And if you relate it to your spiritual journey, that's a gradual process as well, or faith. You build on that. You build on that faith. And God is ever increasing your faith. He's ever increasing his blessings toward you. Because again, as I said, this is a flowing process. It's not a stagnant process. This is not a stagnant situation here. This is a increasing situation. And at this, well, you need to rely on God at all points. But when the things get overwhelmed, verse 5, he mentioned the 1,000 water, like he couldn't pass. It was over his head. Waters were risen and waters to swim in, like a river that could not be passed. So God promised restoration, and that's what the waters represent. The water represents God's presence, represents life, and we're gonna read this in our next outline when it talks about the rivers of life. Okay, let's go to our third outline, and it's about learning. Is the promise of restoration. The promise of restoration, learning. Numbers of trees. And he said unto me, this is in the vision, Son of man, hast thou seen this? In other words, have you took notice of this? Then he brought me and caused me to return to the banks of the river. Obviously, he's taking him out of the river now. This is the vision. He's taken him out of the river and brought him onto the banks of the river. Verse 7, now when I had returned, behold, at the banks of the river were very much trees on one side and the other. Now, the thing about this is that trees and plant life need to be need to have a water source in order for it to be fruitful, in order for it to grow or to nourish it. Okay. If there's no water source, it's going to dry up. Okay. It's not going to be nourished. So when this river, which is now, like I said, the trickle has now became a river. And when he said, when he took me out, when I returned to the banks, there were trees, very many trees on each side of the, and let's look at verse 8. And it says, flourishing fish. Then he said unto me, these water issue out toward the east and go down into the desert and into the sea, which bringeth forth into the sea, the water shall be healed. Okay, now this is referred to when he's talking about the sea, he's talking about the Dead Sea. Now, the Dead Sea, fish, fish couldn't live in the Dead Sea. Plant life couldn't live in the Dead Sea. It's not very much could live in the Dead Sea because the water was too salty. I mean, they could not survive in the Dead Sea. Okay, let's read verse 9 because this is an important verse here, key verse. Now it says, and it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, wherever the rivers shall come, shall live. So basically, whatever the river touch shall live. Okay. There shall be great multitude of fish. As I said earlier, a fish could not live, fish can't live in the Dead Sea. Okay. There shall be great multitude of fish, because there the waters shall come hither, for they shall be healed. And the Dead Sea was healed because it was impossible for fish life to live and plant life to live in the Dead Sea. Not much lived in the Dead Sea. Okay, and because it was healed, because it was made it possible for fish life, for plant life. Okay, for they shall be healed, and everything liveth whether the river cometh. So everything that touches the river shall live. Now, and Jesus said in John 7:38, and Jesus is referred to as the river of life. Jesus himself is referred to as the river of life. And John 7:38, it said, Jesus said, he that believeth on him, as the scripture said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. Now, again, back to the living water. Now, living water is flowing water. Living water is not stagnant. Now, most rivers flow. Now, there may be some rivers that don't flow as much or barely flow, but when you talk about living water is water that flows. Like what we were talking about earlier. The water is first a trickle, then it goes ankle deep, knee deep, and waist deep, and then turns into a river. That's flowing. That's not stagnant. So when Jesus said in John 7:38, he that believeth on him, as the scripture said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of not stagnant water, but rivers of living water. Living water is water that gives life, just like the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea wasn't living water. It couldn't sustain plant life or fish life. Okay. So living water is water that flow. And Jesus Christ is the river of life. And it says in verse 9, that's the scripture, that's the key scripture, as I said, everything that touches the river. Now, this river that we had been talking about is flowing from the temple, from God's dwelling. It's flowing from God. It's the living water that provides life. And that's what provides life, not stagnant water. So Jesus said, out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. And Ezekiel 47 and 9 said, whatever touches the river, it shall live. It's God can revive. And whatever that is dead can be revived. Okay. And this, incidentally, this in Ezekiel, and I talked about a couple of I've been talking about in several weeks about restoration. Now, the Judah was in Babylonian captivity, and they were there for because of judgment for sin committed. That's why they were down there in Babylonian captivity for 70 years for judgment for sin that they committed. However, now Ezekiel had preached restoration for Judah. Now, and this is, we're in chapter 47 now, but and we didn't we've skipped over it so far. But in chapters 37 of Ezekiel, it speaks specifically about the restoration of Judah. Now, in that chapter, I think it's the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, and I'm sure you probably heard about it because you probably heard the sermon preached, and it's about the dry bones. Can these dry bones live? Only you know. And that section of Ezekiel, that is the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, and several verses in the 37th chapter of Ezekiel speaks of the restoration of Judah. But when we get now to the 40th chapter, and I told you earlier, I said this vision begins at chapter 40. We're in chapter 47. So this vision that Ezekiel is shown here is speaking of restoration for all mankind. This restoration here, chapters 40 through 47 of Ezekiel, speaks about the restoration of life of all mankind, not of Judah. Judah's restoration are talked about in chapter 37 of Ezekiel. And that's where, like I said, the example of the dry bones, that's talking about restoration of Judah. But here, in this particular chapter, is talking about restoration for all mankind. It says whatever touches the river shall live. And it is talking about the river of life that's flowing from God. God gives life. He just didn't give life to Judah, but life to the entire world. As I said, Jesus is considered called the rivers of life. So, and he said in John, I already mentioned it, John 37, 7 and 38. St. John 7:38 says, Jesus said, he that believeth on him, as the scripture have said, out of your belly shall flow rivers of living water, not dead water. That is water that revives. So in this chapters, that is chapter 40 through 47, we deal specifically this week with chapter 47, is talking about restoration for the land and people. That is everybody. Is really talking about, scholars refer to this as the millennial time when Christ returned. Okay, that's what this book is talking about here. But again, there was restoration for Israel, yes, and Ezekiel prophesied about that as well. And like I say, it's in chapter 37, about the part where he was talking about the dry bones. That's talking about restoration of Israel, and the temple was rebuilt, yes. But now, when we jump all the way to 47, it's talking about the restoration for mankind. That is reviving mankind. That whatever touches the river, whatever touches the river, that is the living water that flows from God, restores everything to life. It says everything can be restored to life. Whatever touches the river, that shall live. Okay, I believe that was verse 12. Well, I think we read verse 12 as well, which is the end. And upon the riverbank shall, on the side of on that side shall grow all trees for meat, whose leaf shall not fade, the fruit shall thereof be consumed, and forth new fruit according to to his month. And as you read that, you can see it's referring to the millennial time. Okay, but it's talking about the everything will be productive because it is watered by God's spirit, the spirit of God. That whatever touches the river, the God's spirit, it shall live. And that the water or the river represents God's presence, and everything that touches the river shall live. And the river is that life flowing potential from God, or from God's temple. In this case, this is the vision that he sees, but the essence is that life flows from God, and whatever touches that shall be revived, shall live. And that's our lesson today, Ezekiel's vision. And that basically was a vision of a river of life flowing from God, or in this case, from the temple or from God. Okay, that's our lesson. We'd like to thank you for watching. We ask you to join us next week for another edition of the Sunday School Review. Thank you.